This is God Stories Radio Podcast. God Stories Radio Podcast. With Fritz, Mike, and Tina.
Hi there. We here at God Stories Radio are reaching out to you and your business to sponsor us for as little as $10 a month. We need you so that we can continue bringing hope, comfort, and encouragement through the power of the Christian testimony. By your business blessing us monthly, we are able to bless others weekly. To sponsor us, email godstoriesradio@gmail.com. And you don't have to be a business to be a blessing. Visit godstoriesradio.com to donate securely through PayPal. Just press the button.
You're listening to the God Stories Radio Podcast with Mike, Fritz, and Tina. Listen to us live on the Mixlr app. Also, be sure to follow us on iHeartRadio, and you will never miss an episode.
Welcome, everyone, to God Stories Radio. This is session 207. I'm Fritz.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Tina.
What's going on? It's Thursday night.
It's Thursday.
Here we are.
Yes, we did. Yep.
God Stories Radio, under the light.
Well, no light.
Plural. Because we had one that expired. God rest its soul.
Uh-huh.
Well, you know, it's like I was saying, it's probably a good thing because it's the one right over your head, and every time you stand up, you hit it.
Every time.
So
I had thought at some point it would knock some sense into me, but it hasn't come to pass.
Uh-huh. Well, at least it's the light instead of the computer.
Exactly.
you going to give it a decent burial?
I am.
All right.
Yeah.
I know your relationship with lights, how much they mean to you.
I know. It is anytime something,
Electronic.
gives way in the studio. It's hard.
That light's been there since we've been here, so.
I know.
Has it?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, since the studio was built.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the original lights. So there's an original.
Makes it sound so old.
There's
Yeah,
an
they're
original,
the original
original
lights.
dent in that
The
one.
original
right
vintage
There is.
lights.
Yeah,
Maybe that was it, too. Maybe that's why they're not working.
Maybe
You bumped it so many times.
Maybe I could auction it off for some kind of
For
donation.
$2?
Yeah. The first 50 cents gets it. Cost us that much to mail it to you or more. Not so much for the donation. Just come by and get it. Mikey autograph
Might
it.
have to pay somebody to take it.
You know it. Hey, what's going on over there, Mikey?
Just having a sparkling evening here at God Stories Radio.
Oh, Mikey. Sparkling.
Sparkling.
I used that phrase earlier this week at work, and the guy just, whoa, I'm going to use that.
Yeah, because you don't know whether to take somebody seriously or laugh.
Uh-huh.
How's your day? It's sparkling.
What do you say to that? It just makes you
I-
stop and go, okay,
I
let me
said it.
envision this for
Well,
a
you expect
moment.
the riding the wave comment, and then you get sparkling.
I said it, and there was a pause for about a couple of seconds, and he says, wow, I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to use
Sparkling.
that.
Well, yeah.
Just like my water.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's so different.
Oh, boy.
You just don't expect that out of somebody. How you doing, brother? Sparkling. Fantastic.
So how was your week this week?
Man, I've been busy as a sprayed roach this week. I'll tell you what. With Vacation Bible School, everything going down at the church, and I just found out we're going to be host to a big leadership summit and a big CR conference, or Celebrate Recovery conference there. So the wheels are turning.
That's great.
But I love it. Those kids are so cute. They really are, man. Those are kindergartners, preschoolers. They just, they love it, man. It doesn't take much to please them.
You've come home in a good mood.
I know. What happens, then they're teenagers all of a sudden. And,
then you come back to reality.
Yeah. Then you need counseling, and the whole thing's downhill from there. Then you're no longer sparkling.
Yeah, you're just sort Mikey? Of flat.
You're kind of flatlined as a parent.
I can relate.
Golly. I tell you what, man.
Yeah, at least we still have the dog.
We do. Yes, we do. Can always count on the dog to bring you joy. All right. Hey, we're going to welcome everybody on Mixlr tonight. It's going to be a great show. Glad you can make it. Listen to us live. Got my brother Chris in the house tonight. My brother. Real brother. So it's wonderful.
Wonderful.
So Mikey's sparkling. Everybody's good. And I've heard a vicious rumor that we have no shout-outs and no countries.
We have no shout-outs. No, nobody has liked us on Facebook last week. So anyone out there, if you're listening and you have not done so yet, please lift Fritz up with a like on Facebook.
Anybody could do a quick like, for us real quick. Then we can shout out your name. Come on. You can do it. Just go over there to Facebook.
But we did
get
someone did email us with a comment.
Yes, they did.
Yes. I assume it was by Lily, and I assume that she listened to the most recent podcast, 206, Soul. What was it? Soul what?
Rescue.
Soul Rescue, yeah. Mm-hmm. And she says, I would like to say that this podcast has been a blessing in my life. One day, I would like to share our testimony since we are going through a lot. And now she has a prayer request that her husband is going through legal stuff. So that was the comment. I imagine she is referring to session 206 since it came in a couple days ago. And then we have a prayer request for her husband who's going through some legal stuff.
Well, if you're a praying person, if you would put her on your prayer list and her husband, we would greatly appreciate that.
Yes.
We try to lift each other up like family here, and all of you listeners are part of the family.
And I have one more. My son, I spoke to him today. About a month ago, he buried his mother, and just found out that he's now going through a divorce, the start of a divorce. So if you would lift my son up in prayer, I'd appreciate it.
Wow.
So sorry to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that just makes me angry, man. It's just like the devil to try to steal that seed. Something good happened in his life. So, you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So who's our guest tonight?
Yeah.
Right?
Our guest tonight.
Who's the best one to introduce this person?
Probably Donna. She's waving her hands over there. You're not going to make me talk. I will kill you. I'm getting okay. All right. Well, all the way from Tallahassee, Florida, just flew in via caravan. There is an airplane called a caravan, but, by the way, Cessna. Anyway, this is my brother Chris Amrine, and I'm so thankful that he agreed to come on the show, and I'm so apologetic that it has taken me so long to invite him to come on to the show, because I know that he's got an amazing testimony, an amazing history, and being the fact that we have the same dad, we can pass along a lot of pretty cool stories, and it's hours of fun. But I just love you, brother. I tell you. And he married us. He married Tina and I, and we just had a wonderful wedding down on the beach. It was amazing. Couldn't have asked for better weather. And he was there, and Donna was there, and I just there's so many things I could say about Chris, but this is going to be about him and his testimony, so I'm really just going to turn it over to him, and please welcome to the show my brother Chris Amrine.
Who's also an ordained pastor.
Yes, he is.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, you have actually mentioned over the years about coming by, and it just never seemed to connect.
Yeah.
And a couple of times you said, why don't you just call in over the phone? And I've just never been comfortable doing that because I always thought, if we're going to do it one of these days, I have to be there in the studio and watch you guys.
Well, we would rather have the person sitting here. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, but it does logistically, but I've listened to the podcasts and, usually not live, but I'm getting them when I get the links. And it just amazes me, what you guys have been doing for
and you
over
and
5 years now.
Supported us too, and we appreciate that. We just turned 6 years.
I remember.
Ago.
Was it just 6?
Yeah.
Okay, I remembered it went past 200 episodes. I was trying to figure out how many years that added up to all told. And I like all of them. I mean, I've heard the ones that are incredibly dramatic. I've actually liked the ones where sometimes it's just the three of you chatting on a subject because somebody didn't show up. And I think, that you go ahead and do it, I think is wonderful.
That was all Father's plans.
You deal with what you're given, and that's part of. I don't know. You were talking about my testimony, and Fritz, there's a lot of people say this. When I originally said, and I've been in churches and people have come and given testimonies, and they're so dramatic, and they're just, wow, And I always thought, like many people, mine's not like that. But I thought, there's so many ways we could go with this, but my sort of underlying theme, I think, is the little things mean a lot. A change is a change. It doesn't have to be like the whole universe shifts on its axis. Because in my case, I actually had a long religious background, if you want to call it that. I was raised Catholic. So I didn't I didn't grow up in the evangelical church, didn't grow up Baptist. I had friends that, they were Baptist from the day they were told how to say mama or dad. That's all they knew. And I didn't come from that tradition. I came up very traditional. And so I was already religious. In fact, it was amazed me when I started going to a Southern Baptist church for a while. They were stunned that I knew about the Bible because they considered it an article of faith that Catholics didn't read it. I said, not only do we read it, we got more books than you, buddy. And they didn't understand that either, so I had to show it to them. But you can look that up later. They actually do. There's a whole series of books in the Catholic Bible that don't appear in the others.
Yeah, Mikey was Catholic. He sailed on that ship.
I did, but I also understood too that the Bible was basically on the do not read list for a while back in the 70s. Yeah,
well, I go back before that. I actually went Catholic school and we had to read it.
I did too. Really, I didn't read that there.
But I guess it was the order. And those of you that aren't Catholic don't. It's the luck of the nuns.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like because there's Ursuline nuns, there's Dominican nuns. I mean, we could go on for that, but. Some of them are very into teaching, and some of them are more into what shall I say, discipline. Raise them up in the way they should go. And I was lucky enough to have some. If you were interested, they were willing to let you explore. And so I knew a lot about it. Plus, I'm in our food chain. As Fritz said, we are actual real brothers, of a total of 7 kids, 6 from my mom, and then Fritz came my dad's second wife, and. But we've got 7 of them. So I had the ability to sort of experience the cascade of their experiences coming down the food chain. So I really felt very much into it. And the reason I think that's important is I always felt I was fairly, if you'd say, are you religious? Yeah, I go to church all the time. And we mentioned my dad weaves through here, and he should have a story of his own. There should just be like a biography of him for an episode.
Absolutely.
Because what I like to think of, and each kid sees a different perspective, but in my mind, the real story of my dad is what I talked about at his funeral is redemption. He was what I understand was fairly ambitious, smart, really smart guy, but he had a drinking problem that he let get the better of him, and at some point it took over his life and it basically destroyed it. It destroyed ours anyway because my mom finally had enough of him and booted him. And again, there's different stories on that, but from my point of view, he disappeared, and Mom, bless her, for a lot of very valid reasons, had nothing good to say about him. So when I did hear about him, it was always in an epithet, You know, you're acting like your dad. Don't ever let me talk like you're that dirt bag. So, which is just as an aside, as Fritz said, we could do 20 episodes. Parents, don't do that. Okay. I mean, you know, part of what I had to deal with is I realized I'm half this guy and he's scum, was the message I was getting. And I was terrified that I was going to grow up and be him. And so I was on a mission to not be him, which, okay, let's just take that logically. If his life is warped and I'm trying desperately to be his opposite, I'm warped. I'm just like the mirror. And I never thought of it that way.
No.
You know, my mom rewarded me if I was not like him, but I didn't realize you just don't do that. You're twisting yourself in knots for somebody else's opinion. But Dad was always real active in church. And so for a lot of my family, when he blew away, it kind of blew them away. It's like, well, he's the guy and look at what he turned out like, so we don't need this. Well, I never felt that way. To me, church was an escape. It was comforting. It was very predictable. The Catholic Church has a lot of ritual. Some people hate it. For me, it was like, at least I knew what I was going to get there, because a lot of the rest of what was going on in my life was insane. I mean, you know, I never knew what Mom was going to be like. I never knew what the meltdowns were going to be. My brother, older brother, kind of drifted in and out. I mean, it was, looking back, it's kind of, as a kid, you're kind of bouncing around, but looking back, it was like, geez, it's amazing you get out of these things alive. But I kept going to church. And so there were people that said, well, you know, you're the religious guy. One of my brothers-in-law used to call me the preacher of the family, because I was the only one in the family at the time that was going to church, and he just thought that was incredible. So the reason I sort of give you that is to come up to fast forward to a few years later. I'm now married, and I'll say one of my sons, because I don't really want it. It's up to him whether he wants to share the story. But basically, when he was a few months old, he died. He got a form of pneumonia, and his lungs filled up, and he couldn't breathe, and he drowned, and he literally died.
Wow.
But through a series of what I would call miracles, he not only survived, but he thrived.
Wow.
But literally, if I hadn't been up walking him around because he was crying all night, I wouldn't have been awake when he quit breathing, so I could smack him and get him breathing again at 3 a.m. We call the doctor's emergency number. They say bring him in at 8 o'clock. So my wife takes him in at 8 o'clock, not knowing that they'd given her the wrong information. The doctor's not coming till 8:30. But since he was there at 8 o'clock, when he quit breathing again, the nurse who was coming in and setting up was able to give him some oxygen and keep him alive until the doctor got there. Otherwise, he'd been dead if he'd have been home. The doctor rushes him across the street to the hospital, which he just happens to be across the street from, because there's no ambulance he could get quick enough. Gets him in the emergency room so they could pump his lungs out. They then put him in an ambulance and sent him over to Shands Teaching Hospital, which is Gainesville, Florida, the only, at the time, pediatric intensive care in the southeast United States.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
At any one of these steps, if my son isn't in the right place at the right time, he's gone. In every case, he's in the right place at the right time, and he's going to live. They don't know if he's going to be brain damaged, which, this is a joke, by the way, we're still not sure about. But, you know, they've warned us. You know, he's been without oxygen, and it turned out he's a heck of a kid. But we went through this, and I'm going to this Catholic church, and there's one priest, because that's the way Catholic churches were organized in that area at the time. And, of course, he's trying to carry 35 jobs. So I never see him. We're in the hospital in intensive care. We're waiting twice a day. We can go in and see our little boy. And the priest never comes because he's busy with old people that are dying and people that are sick and trying to do the church. But these ladies showed up in the emergency room, waiting room. And I don't know these ladies, but they know us, and they are here, and they say, what do you need? Would you like us to stay with your wife while you go back to work and take care of your older son? Would you like us to bring food? Would you like us to be? And they had it set up as a shift that there would be 2 of them there at all times until he got out of the hospital. Wow. I don't even know who these people are. It turned out one of the ladies I work with went to a little Southern Baptist church that was 15 miles out in the country, and she told them about what happened to our son, and they put together a group. They said, does he have anybody to help him with his other son? And she said, I don't think so. And they just rallied. And I'm like, who are these women?
Wow.
Who are these?
Didn't know you from Adam.
Didn't know. And they showed up. You know, I said, if you have to go back to work, we'll babysit your older son for you. And I'm like, well, thank you. And I'm blitzed, you know, so I'm like, fine. For all I know, I'd handed my son over to gypsies, right? But I mean, at the time, this was like unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when my son survives, I felt like I owed these ladies something. So I'm telling my friend at work, I would like to, can I make a donation or something? She goes, well, it'd probably be nice if you just came over to the church and thanked them. And so my wife actually went first because I was Catholic and I didn't see any reason to go to this Baptist church. And anyway, a couple weeks later, I felt guilty enough and I said, you know what, I'll go one time because I want to thank them. And I went to the church and I met their pastor. It was a little old country pastor. It was a little tiny church. He was bivocational. So, you know, that part in the Bible where it says 2 or more are gathered in our name, one of the things I always like to remind people is it doesn't say where 2,000 or more are gathered.
Right.
The mega churches are today, but all around us are these little tiny churches in the middle of nowhere that might have 80 people in them and might have a pastor that's been there for 30 years and they can't pay him. So he's a beekeeper or an engineer or something on the side, but he's in this church every Sunday. And that's who this brother Tommy was. And so he said, well, why'd you want to come out? I said, I want to thank these ladies because I can't believe what they did. And he said, well, what? And I told him, and he was like, well, that's what we do. And I said, what do you mean that's what you do? He says, well, what would your church have done? I said, well, my church is great, but, you know, people are busy and other things are going on. And he said, well, let me ask you, what church you go to? So he was interested, and he was very shocked that I knew the Bible. So he and I talked the Bible for a while, which was a lot of fun. And he turned to me, he said, so then you do know you're going to heaven? I said, I'm pretty sure of that. That's like throwing raw meat in front of a pit bull. What do you mean you're pretty sure of that? I mean, I was in insurance sales at the time. I knew when he lit up like a Christmas tree, I had pushed a button, but I didn't know what button I'd pushed.
Right.
And he was like, oh, you know, I got a live one here. So he says, really? And he's very cool about it. He said, do me a favor. I want you to go back and get the Gospel of John. He said, he said, read that. And will you come back here in a week and tell me what you thought of it? And I'm saying, I know the Gospel of John. He says, yeah, but just would you do that for me? And I said, well, sure. You know, I'm in it now, right? So I go off and I say, I'm going to read this book of John. And I didn't, but I'm trying to earn a living and I'm driving around. Now, just a little side to the story. I'm in a car and my radio quit working. This is all true. Died. The car ran, but the radio wouldn't work. Now, the net result of that is I'm driving all over North Florida, trying to sell insurance, listening to myself. What this means is that this Gospel of John is going through my head over and over and over. And most of people know about John 3:16. That's like their big verse, their go-to verse. Sure. Everybody knows that. But
I think thanks to Tim Tebow, half the world knows it now.
Well, no, that guy with the funny hair that used to go to all the football games. I mean, but people know that verse. But not everybody knows the context of what that verse created in. It was during a conversation that Jesus was having with a guy named Nicodemus. Mm-hmm. And here's what was insidious about that brother Tommy, because I thought the guy's a country beekeeper, but man, he is sharp. Because after the conversation, Nicodemus and I bonded. And if you know, most of you probably know the story, but if you go and look up Nicodemus, he was a leader of the temple. He was smart. He was not poor. Mm-hmm. People respected him. Mm-hmm. He knew what he was doing. And in verse 3, Jesus tells him he's going to hell. That's just it. And I'm like, what? I mean, this guy is like, this is a dream of this guy. And Jesus says, gives him, unless you be born again, you ain't going anywhere, buddy. And he tells him, and it's very clear if you read that whole section, Jesus respects and loves this guy enough to tell him the truth. And I could not get past the fact that I would have been proud to be Nicodemus. And Jesus just said, that ain't enough, buddy. And I couldn't get over that. So a week later, and, you know, I remember reading on a school application one time, I was writing insurance for a Christian school, and they gave me a copy of the application. And it had on there, state the date you were saved. And I remember at that time not understanding that question.
Uh-huh.
I mean, what? I know when I was baptized. I know when I was Catholic. What do you mean? Who can do that? Well, I can tell you. It was January 5th, 1981. Because that was the day I went back and saw Brother Tommy and said, explain that to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think it's pretty clear. And I said, well, unfortunately, so do I. So he said, well, here's what you got to do. And he told me about sinner's prayer. And he said, we'll do it together. He said, but only if you want to. And I said, I'm open. So we did. And from that point on, it's been different.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no, I was kind of almost hoping for this huge relief, or, something dramatic, like, man, I
Right,
feel
yeah.
so. And he even asked me, you feel different? And I went, I don't know. And he was kind of like, oh, I don't know. Well, do you feel different? And I said, no. But, and I'll just tell you what I realized, and to go back real quick to the story, but one of the things when you grow up in an alcoholic home or you go through that is, and this is very well, it's not just me. I found out later that a lot of people, but you become a survivor. You become very good at being by yourself because the way you get through, and it's probably true of a lot of types of dysfunctional homes, but in my case, it was alcohol, that you create a reality that allows you to survive it, which may have nothing to do with it. And that reality could be a very friendly one. That reality could be you're getting along with people. It could involve work and school. But you are creating a world that shields you from the insanity that's going on around you because that's out of your control. But that leaves you alone. I mean, it becomes a strength to be a survivor because you really feel like you can't depend on the people you count on have either left, disappeared, or they're telling you stuff you don't want to hear anymore because they're going through their own nightmares.
Yeah.
And again, they're good people, but they're not, you don't feel like they're there for you, which is not fair, but hey, you're a teenager, right? You touched on that earlier.
Right.
Put all that through a mind of a teenager, you're gone. And the one thing I knew the minute Tommy and I stood up is that I wasn't alone anymore. And if that alone had been the only thing I ever got out of that, it would have been worth it. Because when I got, there's songs like, In the Garden, he walks with me and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and that is magic to me because it means no matter how far down you go, how far up you go, he's there. Now I might ignore him and be mad at him and do whatever I do, but there has never been a doubt in my mind that he's there waiting for me to, wise up and go, I'm ready when you are, buddy. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I gave you sort of that background. It seemed kind of rambling in a way. Maybe it was a straight line, but how much of a difference it made in my life simply to not be alone anymore, as opposed to, going out and saving the world or whatever. Mm. Now, but that little change then is like plant seeds for everything that comes after. And that's so if there's people listening that feel like, well, I don't know that I've had anything dramatic, or I don't know my life's changed that much, or I don't know that I'll give you an example. I started going to this Southern Baptist church, naturally. And now I'm like, now I owe them big time. Right. And I'm like, I need to understand how come you people are like the way you are, teach me more.
Well, if you were to ask a Catholic that question, if they were going to heaven, 99% of the time you will say, I would think so.
Sure. And that's if you're like a real practicing Catholic, and there's a whole lot of them that are guilty about, wandering away from the church. But yeah, at best. Mm-hmm. Now, I know there's people in the Catholic Church that are saved. That's where I disagree with some really evangelical. But I don't think they got there except on their own. And this is not a knock. I think the atmosphere in those days was very holy. But if you knew your catechism and you knew your prayers and you did everything at the right time, you probably thought you were fine. There was never any point at which they ever said, have you made this decision? Mm-hmm. Now, there is confirmation.
Like they do a formula, right?
And that's not bad, because if you're going into I've told people, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I've used the example that the Catholicism is the McDonald's of religion. And I only get in trouble because people think I'm slamming them. No, I say that as a high compliment. that religion, and part of the reason the Jesuits and a lot of the outreach, the missionaries were so successful, is they have a formula. And it works everywhere. I could go into a church in Nigeria and have no idea what they're saying. And 20 minutes into the Mass, I know what they're saying, because it's the same.
Right.
It's pre-tested, pre-done. It's like traditional Judaism in a sense. It works. We're not messing with it, except that we might change the language, but the prayers are in the same order. And first time I go to Southern Baptist Church, and I'm like, these people are making it up as they go. It's like he says, hey, that's a good one. Let's do another couple of verses of that one. And I'm like, what? Don't we have to get to and then the preacher gets up, and Lord only knows how long he's going to go on. Right. And clearly could care less. It just depends on the mood he's in. And I'm like, and he's in a coat and tie. So there's like, I felt like I'm in somebody's living room. I mean, it was such a culture shock. But it was so amazing, the people, that my reaction was, they have something I don't. What am I missing?
Absolutely. And
that could be true in any situation. And it will change the way you think of things, as I said, as I was mentioning about. I was trying to think of a little thing that you can just tweak something, but sometimes in these smaller churches, for example, if you were measuring these small backwoods churches by growth. And I was reading an article the other day, number of airplanes the pastor has and all that stuff. You would say these people are a total waste of time. And yet they are some of the most moving, magical, God-centered, earth-moving people. Because for those 60 to 80 people that are in that church, they have changed their lives. And they are a symbol of what's possible and how they can be ministers in their life. Oh, and I remember we were talking about that just Mike, right when you were asking me the question, but I was thinking people come down front and they say, I feel I've been called to ministry. And the instinctive thing is they're going to be missionaries. They're going to seminary. There was a great Billy Graham film for people that are old enough. Billy Graham organization used to make movies the churches showed like on Sunday nights for the parish. It didn't go to the theater. You showed them in the hall with a projector in the back. We all made popcorn. It was cool. And they were sweet movies, but they always had Billy Graham in them, preacher and stuff. But one of them, I told Fritz, I always remembered, was this kid who an angel actually visited and said, God has anointed you. You are going to change the world. And he immediately goes off. He's in high school. And he visions himself saving, like preaching to millions. And he's actually at the Billy Graham crusade next to Billy Graham, and he fails miserably. He crashes in front of crowds. He gets flop sweat. He can't do any of it. But an angel, I'm telling you, a real angel. And of course, his buddies all think he's insane. Finally, the angel shows up and goes, what are you doing? I told you what to do like 2 weeks ago. Well, I've tried everything. It's too stupid. He says, what have you been doing? He goes, you idiot. And he points to the guy that sits next to him in class. He says, him. Talk to him. It turns out he's been called as a missionary to that one guy. And I've never forgotten that, because I thought, that may be, you are all called, but you get caught up in this myth, and what you might be called to do is be the most incredible example at work. Or you might be called to be a teacher who just smiles at somebody that another teacher would have smacked upside the head. Or you might be the person who noticed somebody crying at an insurance office that nobody else noticed. And so you walk up and say, what's wrong? And they tell you 2 years later how much that meant to them. Or you're the person who walked up to a lady in church. I walked into a Wednesday night supper. I used to travel a lot, and I came in Wednesday night straight from the airport for a supper. And I see our church pianist over by herself and music all around her. And she's working on her music. And everybody else that's eating supper is on the other side of the dining room. And so I just figured she's busy. And I almost didn't interrupt her. But I got my food, and I thought, well, I'll see how she's. So I walk over and say, hey, Karen, how's it going on? What's going on? And she goes, I'm fine. And she put her music together and left. Okay. I go over there, everybody else eat. 10 years later, I'm dropping my son off at a youth retreat, and Karen is dropping her daughter off. She's moved from somewhere else. She and her husband got divorced in our church, and she was the pianist, and he was the chairman of the deacons, and it was ugly because the church was not happy when they got divorced. Because, they took sides, and this, how could you two? And they blamed it on her. But I didn't know about any of that. That came up later. But we're dropping the kids off, and I said, Karen, how in the world are you doing? She goes, well, you 4-hour drive back home. You want to have lunch? I said, sure. So we're having lunch, and she said, do you remember 10 years ago or so when you came into the dining room on a Wednesday night? And I said, yeah. And she started crying. She goes, you meant so much to me. I have never been able to thank you enough. And I said, for what? She goes, you're the first person in that church that was nice to me after they announced our divorce. They all blame me, and you were nice. And the reason I want to share that and why that moves me, I was clueless. If you'd have told me I have a mission, that would not have been on my list of possible things. But God puts you in places and says, you know what, I think it was Francis of Assisi, and I've heard it quoted so many ways. I'm not sure what the actual quote is anymore, but, always and everywhere preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. And I've thought, what's amazing, like Brother Tommy for me, I never saw him coming. And I never saw that me smiling and saying hello to somebody, not having any clue where she was at that moment, 10 years later is bringing her to tears. That's not me. I mean, that's just God using things that you don't have. And in summary, I could give you tons of it, but I mean, what it comes down to is I've always thought of it in a non-religious sense as Johnny Appleseed. That maybe what God has, my mission, if you will, is just to throw these things out there without being aware of them. And one day, if I'm lucky, I'll come back and notice they're growing. Wow. But it's not, I've never felt called to preach. I've had people tell me, because in our family, Dina was saying earlier, you can tell your brothers, you both like to talk. But I mean, part of that is people say you ought to be a preacher. And I actually had a pastor one time of one of these, I was in a gospel quartet, so we would travel out to these churches and we'd sing for free for them because I loved, we all loved going down to these churches. They didn't often get music groups coming through because they had no money. And we'd say, hey, we got jobs. We'll do this for free. Yeah. We'll keep the day job. But so we'd go, and I'd love meeting these guys. But I was telling them one time, we were praying ahead of time and talking about, do you feel like you're where you ought to be and everything? And I said, there's times when I get people saying, that maybe you would think of this. He said, so as I understand it right, you travel around the country and you teach insurance courses. I said, that's what I do. He said, and you teach these groups of 200-300 sometimes? I said, yeah, they range from 40 to 100. He goes, you preach to more people every week than I do in a year. He said, you're where you ought to be. And I'd never thought of that. And I thought after he said it, I thought, you know what, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Because again, just to put a final bow on that, I can't tell you over the years how many people I had come up to me and at various times. And again, this is not bragging because I want to stress in every bit of this, I never saw this coming, but someone would come up, and I've just taught an insurance class, right? I mean, just chew on that for a minute.
Right.
General liability principles, right? And somebody will come up to me at a break and they'll say, it is such a rare thing to see a real Christian man up in front of us teaching. And I'll go, where'd you get that? Because I don't believe you should charge people money to come to a business class and turn it into a church service. I just don't. I say that's not fair to them. If they want to go to church, then there's a chime and a place, but I'm not going to, by the way, now that I've got you as a captive audience, I'm going to lay it on you. I just don't, personally, I'm not comfortable with that. And she said, because you use 3 examples involving your Sunday school class. And she said, there's only one person that talks about Sunday school class, and that's somebody that teaches Sunday school. And she drew a line from there. Never occurred to me. And so I remember, the reason I bring that up is I remember that old preacher, and I thought, I didn't know I was preaching to her. But she heard a sermon. And that's, if I could share maybe one overriding thing out of that, say, you know what, if you feel like God's with you, there's a thing called experiencing God that many churches did back a few years ago. And the idea was, instead of you figuring out what God's supposed to be doing with you, why don't you figure out what God's doing and join him? And I realize if you just simply walk with God, you don't have to do anything. He's the one doing it. He'll handle it. Right. You just need to show up. And so if there's anybody listening that feels like you're not good enough, you're tongue-tied, you couldn't quote a Bible verse to save your life, you don't know if you got a testimony or you don't know if you got a story to tell, you know what? Just be the best you walking with God you can, and you would be amazed who you might be preaching to.
That's right. That's all Father wants.
Yeah. And I guess the moral of the story is a very small thing happened to me that changed everything. And it all came from there. And I've just been amazed ever since to have these things thrown up at me. And I do feel some days when I'm not doing enough and I'm not strong enough. And we all go through that because it's called being human. But don't give up. Just keep moving and let him surprise you.
As Renault said, just be happy that you're in the kitchen
with Jesus. Yeah.
Well, and the other side of that, of course, is the things you think where you're knocking it out of the park, you don't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. That's what I love about that high school kid. Man, he died and burned over and over and over. And I thought, well, that's when you think it's about you. It's when I totally forget about it is when somebody will then come up and say, you really said something special there. Mm-hmm. And I realize I don't even remember saying it.
Yeah.
But then I know it wasn't me.
We don't even know how many people we already have touched in a way like that.
No. And you don't know if it's going to be years later
and you
before
found out 10 years later, when
well, that's what I mean.
You never find
There's people that you may have changed and they don't even know it yet.
Right. Oh,
but
yeah.
They'll come to a point and they'll go, you know what? The old me wouldn't have done that. The old me wouldn't have made that choice. That's that guy I heard on GSR. Mm-hmm. That seed grew, and I'd ignored it. Because if it's going to grow, it's going to grow. You can't, I remember I had a kid in my Sunday school class. He was agonizing over moving to Thomasville, Georgia from Tallahassee, which, by the way, is kind of strange because it's only like 15 miles. But he was real worried it's going to change his whole life. And he said, well, I don't know what God wants me to do. I said, what do you want to do? He said, well, it's not about me. It's about what God wants to do. And I told him, and again, not everybody will agree with this. And I said, you know what? You do whatever you want. I have a feeling God will use it. So go to Thomasville if you want, and God will meet you there. And if you don't go to Thomasville, I doubt he's going to go without you. So, if he, and he went, well, I never thought of it that way. And I said, dude, you're just working too hard. But that's, again, comes back to my real feeling. And I've talked to some pastors who we're not total agreement, which I believe is perfectly fine because we're all called to see things and minister in different ways. But I think a lot of people out there don't give themselves enough credit that if you're walking with God, you're doing fine. Don't beat yourself up. Mm-mm. You are an excellent person, and one day, if you know for sure you're going to be there, then well done, good and faithful servant is in your wheelhouse. You don't have to be Billy Graham.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people that I've run into are too quick to beat themselves up. We were talking about C.S. Lewis yesterday. Fritz and I were, and he wrote a book called The Screw Tape Letters. And for those of you who haven't read it, you ought to check it out. It's an old book. But the reason I bring it up is the devil is he's unleashing his demons on earth, and everything they try is not working. And finally, the devil goes to his nuclear option. He says, okay, we've had enough. We're pulling out the big gun. And they say, what's that? Is it pain? Is it pestilence? Is it another plague? He says, no. He said, it's doubt.
Ooh.
He said, when all else fails, make them doubt. And I mean, any of us that have ever been around religious groups or in churches know that there's people who are incredible people and they are dying because they think they screwed it up. Or they think God isn't with them anymore. Or they think that he won't love them because their marriage failed. Or that they...
Doubt and guilt.
And all...
Yeah, condemnation. That's his deal. That's his M.O.
Yeah. So, I mean, I go back to Brother Tommy, genius that he was, beekeeping genius. He says, if you're saved, it's over. So why are you doubting? You can screw it. He said, you can feel as bad as you want, but you're going. And I'll never forget him because that was not part of my, what I had grown up with, that you're going. Mm-hmm. And you cannot screw that up. Mm-hmm. And that just, like I said, I'll say it one more time, that changed everything. And looking back, there's an expression I've used with people that when you're going forward, you feel like you're wandering and lost in the desert. But when you look back, it's always a straight line.
Yep. He's ordered your steps the whole time.
So I hate to keep going off on side streets, so I'll just say that pretty well comes up to where we are, I think.
Wow.
You did very well.
I think so.
What?
Said what needed to be said.
Absolutely. I mean, how many times have we we were in doubt with God Stories Radio, and
yeah,
where are we going, and how come things? And
I'm just glad we didn't quit on the same week.
Right, and then you would say, like Jesus had to preach before a few thousand or anything else. Who are we preaching to? 95 countries.
Yeah,
that ain't no small thing.
No. And I always tell that story about where I was, having a pity party with God, and I said, when do I start seeing? You said that we would see greater things and greater works than even what you accomplished. When do we start seeing those things? And then God Stories Radio, boom, in my head, and it's the Lord, because it happens that quick.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like you said, 95 countries. We're talking to this mic, and there's 95 countries that can hear the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
But just like Chris was saying, it could be 95 countries or 95,000 people, or it could be just one.
It could be the one. Yep.
That is the one that you're intended to reach.
You better believe it.
So, we don't have to be Billy Graham. We don't have to be, out there pounding the pavement or giving our lives in the mission field. Your mission field might be right across the street for your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
It could be in your own household. It could be in multiple ways, but, have you really sought the Lord and asked him, what he wants for you and where he wants you? A lot of times we get caught up in our own thoughts and ideas about what we should and shouldn't do, when really, we really need to be taking it to him, so that we can ask him to put us in the right place. And I think there's a lot of credibility to just what you said about just being a comfort to people, being kind to people. It's becoming such a lost art in this world where people are kind. Yeah. I'm shocked, because I lived in a generation, especially because I wasn't in this country, I lived in a generation where people were extremely kind to each other. They looked out for each other. They didn't have any harm or malice towards each other. And their only intention was to make sure that you were okay. And that seems to be such a lost thing in this particular generation and during this time. But I'm hopeful, because I see some people in this younger generation that are that way, that are kind, that do care, that show compassion. But, some people show more compassion for animals than they do people. Mm-hmm. And, we have to remember we need to be compassionate to each other. We need to look at Jesus as our example. And he definitely walked that walk.
Yeah.
With love and compassion. So.
And you said something too about where should I be? And my response personally would be, you're probably exactly where you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It's just whether you're aware that or not aware, just be grateful and believe that you're there, because that's where you're supposed to be. It's, my brain seems to work in a way, and I'm a teacher at heart. So of course the idea of taking stuff that people find complicated and saying, let me try and help you understand that, and then you go back and dig deeper, is just something that I do. So I might oversimplify. I taught Sunday school for 31 years, so I've gotten used to trying to explain things that are unexplainable in some ways. But one of the ongoing themes you run is, why do bad things happen to good people? Mm-hmm. And I'm not being at all facetious, because, going back, and I'm sure Fritz says, we could all share some pretty horrific stories. I mean, my first marriage blew up, and but I look back and, again, without that, I do not become the person I needed to be to meet Donna, and we've now gone past 31 years on the fly and still counting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And people say, don't you wish you'd met her first? And I said, no, because then I'd have screwed it up with her. Mm-hmm. And people say that, but they don't really absorb it and go, then that horrible thing was not there just to be painful. And it's not like, well, good, you had horrible things because now you're going to learn something. Quite the contrast. It's just life sometimes is horrible. But I've had an expression, I don't know where I got it. So if I stole it from somebody, I give them I apologize. But and I wrote it down in a church years and years ago, was if God throws you off a cliff, take notes. And the reason is, one, it may be the last thing you ever do, so you might as well leave a legacy. But two, you just might survive. And if you do, you can use this. Because there will be people that go off that cliff or are approaching that cliff, and you'll be the only person that can go up and tell them, here's what you need to be thinking about. You don't want to do that. Or if it's going to happen, let me help you. Because I've already been over that beggar, and I've come back to help. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll share two examples of that. One, when I'm in churches, divorce, it's funny, even all these years later, it's still not a badge of honor in a lot of churches. It's kind of like, well, you must have done something wrong.
Sure.
Because, and even if they say, oh, we totally accept you, then the sermons are all about, staying together and finding, and you feel like dirt, But I've told people, I said, that's sometimes, Billy Graham actually said, sometimes you can't unscramble eggs. He actually gave a big sermon on divorce, and he said that, and it made me feel so much better. He said, yeah, there's things you wish didn't happen, but when they do, the only bad thing you can do is not learn from it. Mm-hmm. And I found I can talk to people in our churches having been divorced in a way that there's not a pastor in that church can reach, because they can have all the empathy in the world, but they just don't understand. And that's true of anything. I mean, if it'd be stupid for me to give people, advice on childbirth. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, we know you mean well, but you clearly are clueless. But what do I know? Well, I can talk to, and it came up a lady, and Fritz knows this, at our dad's service, I talked about what it was like to hate him, which, I mean, his pastor was freaking, because I led off and I thought I need to set the tone so the kids that follow can say anything they want. And I said, I'm going to tell you right up front, the one thing my dad wouldn't want me to do is lie. And there was a long time in my life when I basically hated this guy's guts for what I considered still valid reasons. I mean, there was a lot more to it than that, but, good dad, bad dad, what Fritz calls it, But this, in a nutshell, without bad dad, the way he lived the last 35 years of his life wouldn't mean anything, because he changed. He got saved, he got sober, and he became an exemplary person. I mean, he struggled, but he became a chaplain with prison ministries. He became a chaplain at the Salvation Army in San Francisco. He worked with some dudes that just scared me to be in the room with. And this guy is not the guy my mother talked about. Mm-hmm. But if you didn't know the other guy, you had no idea what amazing change. Right. You would have thought, well, he's a good guy. I say, but you're missing the story.
You wouldn't realize he was a changed life.
And that's when I go back to the take notes, is that when I talked to this funeral, I talked about that. And I had some people that came up after that were AA people that my dad had known through his alcohol program. And they said, we talk to each other at our meetings, and this one lady said, I never thought about what it looked like from my daughter's point of view. I just thought she was being terrible because I got sober, and she basically said, what do I care? And she was crushed. She said, I only started drinking again. She said, but it never occurred to me. I basically made her life hell for 10 years. Why should she just forgive me? She said, I'm going to have to earn it back. Mm-hmm. Thank you for letting me see this through her eyes. Well, I was not talking to her. I was talking about my dad. Mm-hmm. But it made me realize again, God throws you off a cliff, take notes. What have you had in your life that you have ultimate credibility? Because that's like your testimony. You can quote Bible verses, but so can Satan. You can do a lot, but only you can tell your story. Mm-hmm. And the people you have on here, I think, are great examples of that. But I think, again, people undervalue. You say, well, I'm just had one disaster after another. You know what? You might be the most valuable witness out there, because you can go to people
That's right.
And you know what you're talking about, and they'll know you know. Mm-hmm. And, I had a lady in our church up in Virginia. Her son relapsed after 4 years. And our assistant Sunday school director came looking for me in class. He said, I don't know why, but have you got a minute? And I said, well, I can let the people study some. What do you want? So-and-so needs to see you. And I'm like, okay. So I go running out. And he drags me down the hallway and he said, I'm trying to get her to go to the counselors. I'm trying to get her to go to the counselors. And I said, who? And he told me, and I said, well, what happened? He said, her son started using again. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh gosh, it's just everything. She comes running up and she throws, and he said, I don't know, she wouldn't talk to anybody but you. And the reason is because I had shared in Sunday school that my oldest son had started drinking and how devastating it was. And she said, those counselors don't know what I'm talking about. But you do.
Yep.
Because you've got a child you love and you didn't know what to do.
Right. You've been there.
And I thought, see, I wouldn't have valued that because in my mind, the memory is, I wish my son had not done that. Mm-hmm. But again, throws off a cliff. Take notes because somebody is going to walk along someday. And the only reason you're going to be able to reach them is because you went through that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the power of the testimony, Chris.
And that's why I love what you
come
guys
in here.
do.
And we've had people come in here and absolutely, they get to a point in their testimony and they absolutely lose it. They absolutely just break down because you're reliving those moments. And that's where the power is, though. And I think that's where the people pick up on that because to you, you're just sharing an incident that happened in your life. But the power in that story that's emanating from it, people go, it changes their lives.
And that's, I mean, if you could just
amazing.
Instead of beating yourself up over why is God doing this to me, if you can just simply flip that and go, I'm being taught.
Right. I'm getting some street cred.
I hate it. I am not going to be, and that's okay, because even Job went ballistic and God said, that's okay. You're an idiot. I'll let you do whatever you want. But remember the lesson, because there's a purpose in this. And, we can say, well, it's like your parents. Well, sometimes my parents just were ugly, but, someday you'll thank me for this. And I've lived long enough and I'm old enough to look back on a lot of those things that I absolutely still am not happy happened. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm not glad of what happened, but I realize there were two ways to go. I could either descend into just being angry the rest of my life and saying God is a terrible person and who cares, or go, you know what? He must really think a lot of me. Yeah. Because he knew I could take it. He won't give you anything you can't endure. And I'm just going to file it away because I have no clue when this is going to come back to roost. But I know for a fact he doesn't waste anything.
No. Pretty much of what you're saying, God Stories Radio's verse, we have our mission statement, but the verse says, praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our own troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God.
Well, that's why you said it. We've contributed. I listen to these things because I believe in what you're doing. I think what you do, and there's places for anybody. That doesn't mean, these guys that want to have their jets. I don't understand those guys, but you know what? I have friends who will not listen to a message if it's not delivered by a guy that looks like he's making a lot of money, because that's what they relate to. And I know other people. True. I know other people that don't want to listen to somebody that's not some backwards preacher, because them guys back in the woods, the only ones that really preach the word. You know what? There's a song you played after an episode a couple of times ago, and I had not heard that song in I don't know how long, but I sang it once in church, and I got crying when I heard it again, because I thought, wow. And it's Jesus, he meets you where you are. Friend of a wounded heart. And I remember thinking, then you can't get away from him. Mm-mm. Because you're right where you need to be, because if you like the guy, if you go where you're not supposed to go, he'll just go with you. Because he'll make something out of it. Yep. There is no waste. God doesn't waste time. But it's okay if at the time you think clearly somebody here's on drugs, because this makes no sense and I hate this. But like I said, after a while you start going, well, it's easier to swallow because it always worked out before.
Well, and he speaks to that too. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. We're all classic overthinkers. So it's like,
but it's okay to ask.
I agree with you. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, God doesn't mind if, I always love that song from Fiddler on the Roof. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? God doesn't mind if you ask. He knows we're human.
He wants us to take it to him.
He wants us to.
And he can laugh and go, yeah, like you'll ever get that. But so ask. But, that's why I guess I keep looping back to the idea, sort of one of my biggest things. I just feel bad that life can make you suffer enough without you being your own worst torturer.
Mm-hmm.
And,
that was well said.
And too many people just dig in deeper in the coals.
Yep.
And instead of at least saying, well, what's the best I can get out of this? And I think, you'll come out of it. There is a point to it, even though you don't see it. But I don't know any other way to say it other than just keep moving.
Amen to that. He can see around the corner.
Yeah, you say that a lot. I like that.
That's right. Wow. That was awesome.
It was.
In under 2 hours.
Well, it's because I cut the dad part short.
I know. Oh, man.
Wow.
Well, we're so grateful that you came up.
Yes,
all
thank
this
you.
way
I just,
to come and-
thanks.
to come and do this in person. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's kind of, I feel like I'm meeting the stars here. I mean, I seriously, you guys, you do something that's amazing, and I think that's great.
Well, you have prayed for us and supported us and just been a partner with us the whole time, and we just couldn't have done it without you, and I so love you and appreciate both of you. You too, Donna. And we thank you so much.
She really is here, by the way.
She really is.
She just refuses to acknowledge
She
your presence.
is, gave me the I ain't gonna talk, don't make me talk eyes. Listen, if you've got a testimony, drop us a line at godstoriesradio@gmail.com, and they can also
Twit us.
They can twit us on the Twitter, and then like us on Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to see if anybody did while we were just so I can.
Oh my goodness!
I can
Can
do
we
a
say addiction?
So I can do a shout out. Oh well, no. All right, that's okay.
The measure of your life is
It's not about the
likes.
numbers.
I
That's
just hate
okay.
to-
He'll check in another 5 minutes.
I will not. I hope to be having pancakes or something here shortly. So
Do we need to start a recovery program for you?
I might need an intervention. God,
Wow.
I'm sad. I really am. Please pray for me. Oh, thank you so much, each and every one of you, for just praying for us and supporting us, and we just so appreciate it. And God Stories Radio has had no other agenda but to bring hope and comfort.
Absolutely
And,
not.
we just love each and every one of you, and we thank you so much. Hard to believe it's been 6 years and 207 episodes. I mean, God just amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he still
95
has us
countries.
there, so we're doing something right.
Doing something right. We're
he just wants us to show up.
as Chris says, we're going forward. And, has it just been me, or have you felt like that we have been the ones that have been getting encouraged, when Renault was here? he's-
Absolutely.
and then the things that my brother said, and I just feel like we're getting a boost.
Mm-hmm.
And it just an encouragement that God's got it under control. We just need to keep going.
Absolutely.
It's
We
not
don't-
about the Facebook likes, Fritz. Did I say that? I did.
Inside voice.
Inside voice. But we just love each and every one of you. Thank you so much for supporting the show. So, all right. Well, that about wraps it up for session 207. I'm Fritz.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Tina.
God bless.
God bless.
God bless.
I have journeyed through the long dark night, out on the open sea. By faith alone, sight unknown, and yet his eyes were watching me. The anchor holds, though the ship is battered. The anchor holds, though the sail sails are torn. I have fallen on my knees as I face the raging seas, the anchor holds in spite of the storm. I've had visions, I've had dreams, I've even held them in my hand, but I never knew they would slip right through like they were only grains of sand. The anchor holds, though the ship is battered. The anchor holds, though the sails are torn. I have fallen on my knees as I face the raging seas. The anchor holds in spite of the storm. I have been young, and I am older now, and there has been beauty these eyes have seen. But it was in the night, through the storms of my life. Oh, that's where God proved His love to me. And the anchor holds, though the ship's been battered. The anchor holds, though the sails are torn.